Thank you for joining me a little early tonight. It's my turn to prepare the campfire, so I thought it would be a good time to get you alone. The others, well, we have to be really guarded about who we let in, who we trust with these stories. After what happened in 1993, we can't be too careful. I think the reason everyone seems to like you is because you don't ask questions. But you have some, right? After all these stories. Maybe some of it's starting to come together. Maybe you already know. The tale of the Boogie Woman was the first we shared. A story of a tortured girl, Sarah, held captive by her mother in the woods. Children from nearby villages would visit her by night, speaking to her through the basement grate and exchanging treats for stories and conversation. But one night, Sarah's mother found the children with Sarah and swore her daughter would never see them again. And so, she took her eyes. But the children returned, and the next time she was caught with them, the mother took her tongue. And finally, she chopped off both of her growing hands. Not long after that, the shack burnt to the ground, and both Sarah and her mother perished in the fire. All that was left was a clearing in the woods, the same clearing where we gather now. The children returned on the first anniversary of the tragedy and built a campfire of their own, celebrating Sarah by sharing the stories she told them. They vowed to continue her legacy, meeting in secret by the light of the moon, and eventually adopted the name, the Moonlight Order. The 7 original children each recorded copies of the stories into diaries, promising they'd reach eyes and ears beyond their own. And as time passed, they added local legends to the pages and stories whispered at summer camps and sleepovers, or sometimes pulled from the news. The stories that spread the furthest tended to become a melting pot of new characters, beginnings, and ends. Some were combined, and some forgotten. But every single one of them is true, somehow. Beyond the spectacle, underneath the blood and guts, at the core of every scary story is the truth. Some prefer to stay in the dark and think the unfathomable could never happen to them. But the others, the rest of us, we accept that our world is filled with horrors beyond imagination, and monsters are real. By the 80s, the Order met weekly. After so many generations had dutifully passed the tradition on to the next, the latest had stopped respecting the stories. For them, it was more about a chance to hang out than recognizing any sort of responsibility. On October 8th, 1993, someone brought a friend. Like all potential new members, she was led to the clearing in a blindfold. And like all other Moonlight Order gatherings, they began with the story of the Boogie Woman. Sarah Boogie Woman. According to tradition, the guest would tell the final story of the night. If the others liked it, they'd join the group. But Elenore wasn't like anyone who came before. Through the whole evening, the others had joked around, jumping out from behind trees like idiots and passing around beers. But Elenore kept to herself. She was quiet, mysterious. And when it was her turn to tell a story, she shared the tale of a young girl, Mary, raised away from society by her loving mother, who one night finds her mutilated twin sister locked away in the basement. Mary tried to save Sarah, who couldn't see or speak to her, but it was too late. Their wicked mother had found them. In the struggle that followed, an oil lamp ignited the straw across the floor, and the shack erupted in seconds. Unable to rescue her dear sibling, Mary barricaded the cellar door behind her, locking her mother below the house to die alongside her. Mary rejoined the world, but remained plagued by her sister's tortured soul. She had to know that Sarah was free from suffering. She immersed herself into black magic and the occult, creating her own book of witchcraft as she desperately tried to find a way to either contact her sister or free her for good. Finally, she found a spell she thought could work. She sliced her hand deeply, bleeding onto the pages while reciting the text. But there was no response of any kind, and if Sarah had been freed, she gave no sign to her sister. Mary considered herself a failure when she died. Her clandestine book of spells waited in the shadows for 200 years, finally reaching the hands of her great-great-granddaughter, Elenore, who found the book, rotting, tattered and bulging with additions and drawings. Some pages were torn, some burnt or scratched out, some smeared with what appeared to be blood. Learning of her family history, Elenore became obsessed with the lives of Sarah and Mary, and eventually vowed to complete what Mary had started. And by the 90s, Elenore was quickly able to learn of something that Mary never knew existed. Something called the Moonlight Order. The group wasn't hard to find, nor was it difficult to earn an invitation. And so, that night, in 1993, Elenore revealed herself to the others and stood before them, cutting her hand deeply and letting the fresh blood fall to the pages, uniting with Mary's, and into the soil below. Eleanor's great-great-grandmother knew the ritual needed her family's blood, but she had never realized it had to take place at the site of the death. As Elenore finished the conjuring spell, a massive fireball burst from the flames, forcing the group back into the tree line in terror. Seconds later, the campfire returned to the low glow of the retiring embers. The crickets were quiet. The wind still.
Do you think it worked?
I don't know. I hope so.
Do you have any idea what the consequences could be messing around with this stuff?
I set her free. What she does now, that's for Sarah to decide.
We didn't do anything to deserve this.
Are you so sure about that?
Elenore, we are not our ancestors. We're the ones honoring her.
Honoring her? Gary, please. Who was the monster in your story tonight?
Sarah.
Sarah what?
Sarah, Boogie Woman.
200 years treated like a joke. Her name was Bogan. Sarah. Elenore. Bogan.
Sarah's long, separated blood relative pointed her knife at the boy.
You look just like him in the firelight, you know? He abandoned his entire family because he was too scared of what others might think. It's his fault that Sarah was tortured her entire life, and her mother and sister died in agony, and now you have the nerve to gather and take pleasure in their pain.
Whatever you think this is, Elenore, it isn't justice. Think about it, it's not fair.
No, maybe not. But I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for listening to my story. Now, Sarah is finally free. And whatever happens next, maybe you deserve it.
And Sarah was free to take revenge upon a town that refused to save her. A wave of violence swept the normally quiet area as the spell took hold of the town. The conjuration that Mary had selected allowed Sarah to possess the townspeople and force them to commit horrific acts on themselves, each other. Have you ever heard of someone who just snaps? Cars drove off roads into crowds or buildings. There were shootings, stabbings, people poisoned, and fires. Sarah loved fires. She used the town to show just how monstrous humans can be. Of course, there's no way to prove it, and the incidents mostly petered out after a few years. The authorities and papers did everything they could to sweep it under the rug, and the town, more or less, returned to normal. People tend not to believe in something unless they can see it, and demons don't often leave footprints. The general public had basically immortalized it all as a campfire story before a decade had even passed. And in those years that followed, the clearing remained empty. The kids who knew of the Moonlight Order were too scared to brave the woods and reignite the flame, and no one knew what had become of Elenore or the group from 1993. For over 2 decades, the Order was quiet. But an ember in the ashes can spark and burn long after parting from the flame, and eventually a group of storytellers found each other, who respected the history of the stories and believed in them, and who braved the dark woods to gather once again in Sarah's clearing. Centuries ago, the Moonlight Order was established by people just like us, surrounded by trees, just like these, and it's our honor to record them, new and old, to pass on to all who listen. For Sarah Bogan. Now you know the weight of the question we're asking when you hear. Wanna hear a scary story?